Lara stood at the edge of the training arena, her eyes scanning the room filled with recruits from across the galaxy. They were all here for the same reason, to become soldiers. Some were human, like her, and some were from other species, each unique in their own way. But Lara had a reputation that made most of them nervous when they saw her step onto the floor. She wasn't like the others. Earth, her home, was known as a death world, a place where danger lurked around. Every corner and survival was the only thing that mattered. Other species often couldn't fathom the harsh conditions humans had to face growing up. To them, it seemed almost impossible. But to Lara, it was just life. Today's class was basic hand-to-hand combat, something every soldier needed to master. The instructor, a towering alien with several eyes and multiple limbs, looked around the room and began assigning sparring matches. As he read off the names, Lara stood quietly in the back, watching, waiting for her turn. She could feel the eyes of the other recruits on her, each one either admiring or fearing her. Then the instructor's voice cut through the air. "Lara, you'll be sparring with Varn." Varn was from a peaceful species known for their advanced technology and strength, but their kind had little experience in real combat. They had never needed it. His species believed in diplomacy and intelligence, and while they were physically strong, they had never faced the sort of challenges humans dealt with on death worlds. Varn stepped forward with confidence, flashing a smug smile. His muscles rippled beneath his uniform, and he had the air of someone who thought that strength alone could win any battle. He looked at Lara, sizing her up. He probably thought she was just another human recruit, someone easy to beat. Lara wasn't worried. She had been through much worse than this. The instructor signaled them to begin. As Varn lunged toward her, his movements were fast but not calculated. He was trying to show off, to prove to everyone that he was the strongest. But Lara had dealt with far more dangerous creatures and far faster opponents. She barely moved. As he threw a punch, his fist aimed for her shoulder. She easily sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him forward. Varn stumbled, surprised that he had missed so easily. Lara didn't waste a second. She grabbed his arm and twisted it, flipping him onto the floor with minimal effort. His back hit the mat with a thud, and the breath was knocked out of him. The room was silent. The instructor stared, unsure whether to intervene or not. Varn lay on the floor, his face flushed with embarrassment. He tried to sit up, his pride wounded. This wasn't how he imagined things would go. Lara stood above him, her expression unreadable. "Is that all you've got?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying the weight of years of survival. Varn's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Lara thought he might just get back up and attack again. But instead he stayed down, breathing heavily. His confidence had shattered in an instant. The instructor finally spoke, his voice low and careful. "Enough," he said. "Take a break." Lara stepped back, her body relaxed. She didn't feel the need to boast or rub it in. She knew what she had done was simple. To her, it was just another day in a world where survival was everything. Varn, however, wasn't ready to give up so easily. He pushed himself up, brushing off the dirt from his uniform. He shot a glare at Lara, his pride stung. "You got lucky," he muttered. Lara didn't respond. She wasn't there to prove anything to him. The instructor gave Varn a look, a mix of concern and disappointment, before turning to the class. "Remember, strength means nothing without strategy. And arrogance has no place in combat." Varn didn't seem to hear him. He was too focused on his humiliation. He glared at Lara, his jaw clenched, and Lara could see the anger building in him. It was clear that he wasn't used to being bested by anyone, especially not a human. The instructor signaled for the class to continue with the next round of sparring. But Varn, still fuming, didn't let it go. "I want a rematch," he said, his voice sharper now. "I wasn't ready. This time I'll show you." Lara turned toward him, her face calm. "You've had your chance," she said. "But if you really want to learn, I'll teach you." Her words weren't an invitation to another fight. They were a promise. If Varn wanted to prove something, she would help him. But not in the way he expected. The class went on, but Varn didn't take his eyes off her. He knew now that there was more to being a warrior than just strength. And Lara, as much as she had no interest in fighting again, understood that he would need to learn that lesson the hard way. The air was thick with tension, and Lara couldn't help but wonder if Varn would ever truly understand the world she came from. She had fought in wars, survived on Deathworlds, and faced creatures that would have killed him in an instant. And yet, here he was, still thinking he could win with just brute force. In time, he would learn. But for now, Lara knew that this was just the beginning of a very different kind of battle. The next day, the training hall was filled with the usual hustle and bustle of recruits getting ready for their exercises. The metallic floor of the arena hummed beneath Lara's feet as she stretched, preparing for another round of hand-to-hand combat. Her body moved with the ease of someone who had been doing this for years, and despite the tension in the room, she was calm, almost detached from it all. But Varn was different today. He had been up all night training on his own, pushing his body to its limits. He was determined not to make the same mistake again, determined to prove that he was more than just strength. His pride was on the line, and he wasn't going to let a human outclass him again. Lara could feel his eyes on her as he walked across the training floor, a fire burning in them. He had been humiliated, but now there was something different in the way he moved. He wasn't just walking toward her with arrogance anymore. He was walking with purpose. The instructor, who had watched yesterday's sparring match with a mix of surprise and curiosity, called them to the center of the arena. "Lara Varn," he said, his voice echoing in the still air. "This time I want to see something different. No more mistakes. Fight like real warriors." Lara stood tall, her eyes meeting Varn's. He was bigger than she was, stronger, but she knew that size wasn't everything. He might have trained all night, but it didn't matter. In the end, it was not the force behind a punch, but the mind that guided it, the speed, and the experience. Varn wasn't prepared for how different this match would be. He charged at her with the same brute force that had failed him yesterday, but Lara was already 3 steps ahead. She sidestepped him easily, her movements fluid and precise. She didn't need to rely on strength to take him down. She just used his momentum, letting him push himself further than he intended. "Your moves are too obvious," Lara said calmly, as she twisted his arm behind his back and pushed him to the floor again, just like before. Varn grunted as he hit the mat, his breath coming out in sharp bursts, his face flushed with frustration as he scrambled to get up. "You can't keep doing this," he muttered, anger seeping into his voice. He wasn't used to being outclassed, especially not by someone he considered weaker than him. But Lara didn't react. She simply took a step back, waiting for him to get up. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you," she said, her tone steady. "I'm just showing you how things work here. This isn't a playground. If you want to survive, you need to think smarter." Varn glared at her, but this time something in his expression had shifted. There was no arrogance, no cocky smirk. There was only the cold, hard realization that she was right. He hadn't been thinking. He had been relying on his strength, expecting it to win the fight for him. But that wasn't enough in this place. In this world. He stood up again, wiping the dust from his uniform, but this time he didn't rush. His movements were more measured, more deliberate. He wasn't charging at her like before. Instead, he circled her, looking for an opening. Lara watched him closely, knowing that he was finally starting to understand. He wasn't just rushing into the fight anymore. He was thinking, adjusting his strategy. But it was too late for that. Now, Varn made his move, trying to feint left and then attack from the right. It was faster than before, more controlled, but Lara was already ready. She ducked under his strike, grabbed his arm and pulled him off balance, sending him crashing onto the ground once more. "This isn't about strength, Varn," Lara said, standing over him again. "It's about survival. Every move counts. You don't fight just to win. You fight because you have to." Varn didn't get up this time. He lay on the floor, panting, his body sore from the repeated defeats. His pride had been shattered, but something inside him had changed. He was starting to see the difference between his species' strength and the survival instincts that Lara had mastered. It was no longer about being the strongest. It was about knowing when to strike, when to retreat, and how to read your opponent. Instructor watched the two of them silent, his expression unreadable. He had seen this happen before, but never with such intensity. Varn had been so sure of himself, so confident in his strength, but now he was learning something far more valuable, the true meaning of combat. Lara stepped back, letting him take a moment to collect himself. "Get up when you're ready," she said, her voice soft but firm. She wasn't going to baby him. She had been through too much to offer pity. Varn didn't speak for a long time. He just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, his mind working. He had thought that humans were weak, that they were nothing compared to the might of his species. But Lara had shown him the truth. Strength alone couldn't win a battle. It was the mind that led the body, the experience that guided the hand. Finally, Varn pushed himself up. His movements were slower, but there was something different in the way he moved now. He wasn't just another recruit. He was learning, adapting, becoming something more. "You're right," he said, his voice quieter now, but there was no shame in it, only respect. "I was too focused on winning. But you've taught me that there's more to this than just strength." Lara nodded, acknowledging his words, but didn't offer any further praise. She didn't need to. He had taken the first step toward understanding, and that, she knew, was the hardest part of all. As the class continued, the room felt different. Varn wasn't the same arrogant recruit that had walked in the day before. He was quieter now, more focused, and that made him more dangerous. But it also made him a better student. And perhaps one day, he would become the warrior he had always believed he could be, but only if he learned to think before he acted. The next few days were filled with quiet tension. Varn was no longer the cocky recruit who walked into the training hall thinking he could easily defeat anyone. Now he spent hours studying Lara's every move, trying to learn, trying to adapt. His pride had been wounded, but his mind was working. He realized that the key to combat wasn't in strength alone, but in the ability to read the situation, to anticipate the moves of your opponent. Lara noticed the change. During training, Varn was quieter, more focused. He no longer rushed into each sparring match with the same blind confidence. Instead, he took his time, analyzing her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She could see the determination in his eyes, the hunger to improve. One morning, the instructor announced a new challenge for the class. This time, it would be a full simulation, an all-out combat exercise where the recruits would be placed in different teams to carry out a mission. The goal was to neutralize a simulated enemy force, using the skills they had learned in the previous weeks. It would test everything: strategy, teamwork, and the ability to think on your feet. Lara was assigned to one team and Varn was placed on another. The two of them didn't speak much as the instructor explained the rules. They were teammates, before in training, but now they were on opposite sides. The simulation would be their biggest test yet. Lara's team was made up of experienced recruits who had already shown promise in combat, while Varn's team was a mix of newer recruits, many of whom hadn't been through as much training. Lara could see the hesitation in Varn's eyes as he surveyed his teammates who were clearly not as well prepared as she was. He wasn't sure if they would be able to handle the pressure, but she had faith in him. Varn had come a long way in a short time. She knew that the skills he had learned, thinking before acting, using strategy instead of strength, would help him lead his team, even if it didn't seem like it at first. As the simulation began, Lara's team moved quickly, silently through the simulated terrain. The instructor had designed the scenario to test their ability to work as a unit, to adapt to changing conditions, and to take down an enemy force without losing anyone. Lara's team was prepared for this. They worked together as one, each person, understanding their role, reacting as if they had been through this many times before. Varn's team, on the other hand, was more disjointed. They lacked the same coordination, the same instinctive understanding of each other's movements. They hesitated at the wrong times, moved too quickly at others, and seemed to be constantly one step behind. Varn was trying to lead them, but the pressure was getting to him. He could see the mistakes happening, and his frustration was starting to show. But then something clicked. Varn took a deep breath and remembered what Lara had taught him. It wasn't just about rushing in with strength or trying to force things to happen. It was about patience, timing, and using your mind. He started directing his team more clearly, giving simple, direct orders that they could follow. Slowly, their movements became more synchronized. The hesitation started to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. Varn's leadership was starting to make a difference. Lara watched from a distance as Varn's team began to improve. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but they were starting to show signs of understanding. The key was that Varn had stopped focusing on the mistakes and started thinking about solutions. Instead of worrying about his team's weaknesses, he began to use their strengths. Her team had already reached the objective and the mission was almost over. But she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she saw Varn's team push forward. He had taken everything she had taught him and applied it in the most difficult situation yet. She had always known he had the potential to be a great leader, but now she was seeing it unfold right before her eyes. The simulation ended with her team winning, but Varn's team had made significant progress. The instructor called everyone together to review the exercise. As usual, he praised the winners, but this time he turned to Varn's team with a new respect. "Varn," the instructor said, "you showed great improvement. Your leadership under pressure was solid, and you adapted quickly when things weren't going according to plan. Keep that up and you'll go far." Varn nodded, his face serious. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step forward. His team had learned to work together, and he had learned to be the leader they needed. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth having ever was. Lara watched him closely, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. He had done well, but she knew there was still much more to learn. The road ahead was long, and there would be more challenges. But for the first time, Varn wasn't just reacting, he was thinking, and that made all the difference. As the recruits gathered their things and left the training hall, Lara found herself walking beside Varn. She didn't say anything at first, but after a moment she spoke. "You did good today." Varn looked at her, his face a little less tense than before. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you." Lara nodded. "You're getting there. Just remember, it's not always about how fast you can get the job done. It's about making sure you don't make the same mistake twice." Varn smiled slightly. "I'll keep that in mind." And as they walked out of the hall, Lara knew that Varn had finally started to understand what it meant to survive. Not just survive in combat, but in life itself. The days after the simulation passed quickly, and Lara could feel the growing sense of purpose in the air. Varn's confidence was slowly returning, but it wasn't the arrogance he had displayed before. Now there was a quiet determination in his eyes. He had come to understand that leadership wasn't just about commanding others. It was about understanding, adapting, and being willing to learn from mistakes. Lara, however, was still focused on the bigger picture. She wasn't just here to train recruits. She was here because something bigger was on the horizon. The galaxy was always in motion, and she knew that the skills they were learning were going to be put to the test soon. But for now, the training continued. One morning, the instructor called for a meeting. The recruits gathered in a large, circular room, the walls made of solid, dark metal that reflected the dim light. The instructor's voice echoed as he spoke. "We have received news," he said, pausing as the room fell silent, "that there is a growing threat on the outskirts of the galaxy. A new alien species is making its way into our territory. We don't know much about them yet, but we do know they are strong, intelligent, and ruthless." The room buzzed with whispers as the recruits looked at each other, uncertain of what this news meant. Lara's mind was already racing, but she kept her face calm. This wasn't just any threat, it was a real danger, one that could change the course of their lives. She knew they would have to be ready. We'll be preparing for combat drills over the next few days, the instructor continued. It will be intense, but I expect all of you to give it your best. Lara turned to look at Varn. He was staring at the instructor, his jaw tight with concentration. This would be their biggest challenge yet, and he had to be ready. For the first time, she could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. He was no longer just a recruit. He was a leader. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. The recruits trained harder than ever before, working together in teams, practicing their strategies and learning new techniques. Lara spent extra time with Varn, helping him refine his leadership skills. She taught him how to read his team, how to notice the small details that could make a difference in a fight. Varn was improving, but the pressure was on. The threat they faced wasn't something they could take lightly. Every move, every decision, had to be perfect. Lara knew that the galaxy was full of enemies, but this one felt different, more dangerous, more unpredictable. One afternoon, as they took a break from training, Varn found himself sitting next to Lara on the edge of the training field. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the arena. I never thought it would be like this, he said, his voice quiet. I thought I knew what it meant to be a warrior. But every day, it's like there's more to learn, more to figure out. Lara glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. It's always like that. You can never stop learning, never stop adapting. A true warrior isn't someone who wins every fight. They're someone who survives no matter what. Varn nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I thought I could just rely on strength, but now I see that it's not enough. I've learned that the hard way. You're getting there, Lara said, her voice soft but firm. The key is to keep pushing forward, to keep learning. You're on the right path, but the real test is still to come. Varn's eyes flicked to her, his face serious. What do you mean? Lara didn't answer immediately. She knew what was coming. The enemy was out there, and they had to be ready. But there was something else she needed to prepare him for. Life isn't always fair, she said, her tone darker now. We can't control everything that happens. The universe is unpredictable, and sometimes things go wrong. You have to be ready for that. You have to be ready to lose. Varn's brow furrowed. I don't understand. Lara turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, things don't go the way you want, and that's where true strength lies. It's not in always winning, it's in what you do when you lose. Varn was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. He had never thought about things that way before. He had always believed that victory was the only thing that mattered, that as long as he was the strongest, he would always succeed. But Lara's words made him question that. The training continued. The days were long, and the drills grew more intense as the threat from the unknown species drew closer. Lara could feel the pressure building, but she kept her focus. This was what they had trained for. This was what they had been preparing for all along. And then one day the news came. The enemy had made contact. They were advancing through the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Their forces were overwhelming, and they had already begun attacking nearby colonies. The galaxy was on the brink of war. The recruits were called to action immediately. Lara and Varn's teams were among the first to be deployed. The preparation was over. It was time to fight. As they suited up for the mission, Varn looked at Lara one last time. There was no more time for words. They had done everything they could. Now it was up to them to survive. Let's get this done, Lara said, her voice calm but filled with purpose. Varn nodded, a fire burning in his eyes. He was no longer the unsure recruit who had stepped onto the training field weeks ago. He was a leader now, and he was ready. Together they stepped into the unknown, prepared for whatever the galaxy had in store for them. The days leading up to the deployment were filled with a sense of urgency. Recruits moved through the training hall faster than before, the sound of their boots echoing off the metal floors. The air was thick with tension, and even the strongest warriors among them seemed nervous. They had trained for this moment, but there was no way to truly prepare for what they were about to face. Lara had seen battles before, She had fought in wars and survived on dangerous worlds, but this felt different. The galaxy wasn't ready for this enemy, and the unknown species they were about to face had shown no mercy. They were relentless, and the reports about their speed, strength, and tactics sent a chill down everyone's spine. But Lara wasn't going to let fear control her. She couldn't. As much as the others looked to her for guidance, she had to stay calm. She had to lead them through the unknown. Varn stood near the edge of the training area, his eyes scanning the other recruits. His hands were clenched into fists, and the tension in his posture was evident. He had come so far since their first sparring match, but this was different. There were no simulations, no drills, no rules. The real battle was ahead, and the stakes were much higher. Lara noticed his unease. She knew that Varn was still learning how to balance his emotions. He had always relied on strength, but now he had to lead others. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone, and that responsibility weighed heavily on him. She walked over to him, standing silently by his side. He didn't look at her right away. He was lost in thought, his brow furrowed. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "Do you think we're ready?" His voice was low, almost uncertain. Lara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his question. "No one is ever fully ready for something like this," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But we've trained, we've prepared, and now we have to trust what we've learned." Varn nodded slowly, still staring ahead. He was quiet for a moment, as if weighing her words. "I never thought it would feel like this," he said. "Back on my homeworld, I thought we were the strongest. I thought we could handle anything. But now, I don't know." Lara looked at him, her expression serious. "You're not alone in this. None of us are. You've learned how to think, to lead. That's what will get us through. Not strength. Not power. It's how we work together." Varn turned his head to look at her then, his eyes filled with determination. "I'll do my best. I won't let anyone down." Lara gave him a small nod. "I know you won't." The sound of an approaching ship interrupted their conversation. The instructor called everyone to the landing bay. The time had come. It was no longer just about preparing. It was about facing the enemy head-on. The recruits filed into the hangar, their faces a mix of nervousness and determination. Their ship stood ready, sleek and silent in the dim light. Each one would carry them to the front lines, to a place where the unknown enemy awaited. Lara walked up the ramp of her ship, Varn following closely behind. The ship's interior was dim, lit only by the soft glow of control panels. The team's equipment was neatly stowed, and everything was in place. This was it. There was no turning back. As the ship took off, the vibrations could be felt through the metal floor. Lara sat in her seat, strapping herself in, while Varn took his position at the tactical console. She watched as the stars outside stretched into streaks, the ship traveling faster than the eye could follow. The crew was silent, each person deep in their own thoughts. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines, a constant reminder that they were on their way to a battle they might not survive. Lara glanced over at Varn. His fingers hovered over the controls, his eyes focused but distant. He was trying to mask his nerves, but she could see it in his posture. He was still unsure, still questioning his ability to lead them. She leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but steady. "You're doing great, Varn. Just keep calm and stay focused. You've got this." Varn glanced at her, his expression hardening. "Thanks, but I'm not sure any of us are ready for this." Lara didn't answer immediately. She understood what he meant. The unknown species wasn't just another enemy to fight. They were different. Their tactics were unpredictable, and their power seemed endless. But she had to believe that they could make it through. The galaxy wasn't giving them much of a choice. As the ship continued its journey, the tension only grew. Lara's mind was focused on the mission ahead. She was no longer thinking about what they were about to face, but how they would survive it. Every decision, every move would need to be calculated. No mistakes could be made. Finally, the ship began to decelerate and the instructor's voice crackled through the comms. Prepare for landing. We'll be entering enemy territory shortly. Stick to the plan, stay sharp, and remember your training. This is it, everyone. Lara took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was to come. She glanced at Varn one last time before they prepared for the drop. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't fear of the unknown, it was the fear of losing everything they had worked for. But that fear wasn't going to stop them. They were prepared to fight. As the ship's engines slowed to a stop, the ground beneath them rumbled. The doors opened with a loud hiss, revealing the harsh, war-torn landscape outside. Lara stood up, ready to lead her team. The battle had begun. The ground beneath Lara's boots felt solid, but the air around them was thick with tension. The landing zone was barren, a desolate stretch of land filled with jagged rocks and dust. The team gathered quickly, moving with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had spent countless hours training for this moment. Every movement was calculated, every word spoken with purpose. This was no longer just a mission, it was survival. Lara could feel the weight of the moment. The enemy they were about to face was unlike anything they had trained for. Reports had said they were fierce and fast, with technology that outmatched anything the galaxy had seen. But Lara wasn't going to let fear dictate their actions. She couldn't afford to show weakness now. If she did, the others would follow her lead, and they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The squad's commander, a grizzled veteran with scars to prove it, gave them their orders. We move out in 2 groups. Lara, Varn, your team takes the left flank. Stay low, stay fast, and don't get separated. We'll cover you from the right. His voice was sharp, commanding. Lara nodded, glancing at Varn, who stood beside her, his eyes focused but still holding that hint of uncertainty she had seen in him before. He was ready, but the weight of responsibility was heavy. This was the first time he was leading a team into combat, not as a recruit but as a leader. And while his progress had been impressive, there was still a part of him that doubted. "You've got this," Lara said quietly, knowing he needed the reassurance, even if he didn't show it. Varn met her gaze and gave a tight nod. "Let's move." The group split up, with Lara and Varn leading their team toward the rocky outcrop to the left. The air was hot and dry, and the constant crunch of boots on gravel was the only sound for miles. The planet was eerily quiet, the only movement coming from the occasional gust of wind sweeping through the desolate landscape. Lara's senses were on high alert. She scanned the horizon, keeping an eye out for any movement, any sign of the enemy. The reports had said the alien species was quick, stealthy, and deadly, but they were also known to work in small, tactical groups, which meant that they would likely be waiting for the right moment to strike. Varn kept pace beside her, his face set in concentration. He was doing better now, moving with more confidence, but there was still a hint of hesitation in his steps. He wasn't used to the unpredictability of real combat. His species relied heavily on technology and strength, but they didn't have the experience in battle that humans did. That was where Lara came in. She had seen death before, and she knew how to stay calm in the chaos. They reached a small ridge and crouched low, taking cover behind the rocks. Lara motioned for Varn to do the same, and he quickly obeyed, his breathing shallow. The rest of their team spread out behind them, covering all angles. Lara's heart rate slowed as she focused on her surroundings. She knew the enemy was close. She could feel it. The silence was too perfect, too unnatural. It wasn't long before a faint sound reached her ears. Footsteps, light but quick, moving across the rocky terrain. The enemy was on the move. Lara signaled to Varn, who responded with a sharp nod. They had trained for this. This was the moment where everything they had learned would be put to the test. "Wait for my signal," Lara whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "When I say go, we move in fast. No hesitation." Varn's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Lara saw no doubt in them. He was ready. The enemy appeared from behind a boulder, their figures hidden in the shadows. They moved with the fluidity of predators, their bodies sleek and agile. There were 5 of them, their features obscured by helmets and armor, but Lara could tell they were much faster than any soldier she had ever encountered. They were equipped with weapons that glowed faintly, and their eyes, when they briefly glanced out from under their helmets, were cold, calculating. Lara watched them closely, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She knew they wouldn't hesitate. If they were spotted, there would be no second chances. Now, Lara whispered, the command barely leaving her lips before she was on her feet, charging toward the nearest alien. Her body moved instinctively, every muscle honed to perfection. She was fast, faster than the enemy had anticipated. Varn followed closely behind her, his movements more measured but still effective. They took the first alien down quickly, using the element of surprise to their advantage. The others reacted quickly, but they weren't prepared for the speed and precision of the human soldiers. The battle that followed was a blur of movement. The alien species fought with skill, their tactics fluid and unpredictable, but Lara and Varn were a perfect team. Each time one of them moved, the other was right there, covering their blind spots. Varn was no longer the unsure recruit. He was a leader now, adapting quickly, reading the battlefield and making decisions with confidence. The enemy wasn't backing down, but Lara could see the cracks in their defense. They had expected an easy fight, but they had underestimated the humans. They had underestimated Varn. In a final, swift move, Varn took down the last alien, his weapon cutting through the air with precision. He stood over the fallen enemy, his chest heaving with adrenaline, his eyes wide with shock at how quickly it had all happened. The battle was over and they had won. Lara approached him, her expression calm, but with a hint of pride. "You did good," she said quietly, her voice carrying over the wind. Varn turned to her, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It was small, but it was enough. He had done it. He had led his team, and he had proven to himself that he was more than just strength. He was a true warrior. "We did it," he said, his voice stronger than before. "Together." Lara nodded, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of more enemies. "It's not over yet," she said, her tone steady. "But we've got this, one step at a time." And as they prepared to move on, Lara knew that this was only the beginning. They had fought their first battle together, and now they were ready for whatever came next. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The dust had barely settled when Lara surveyed the area, her senses still sharp, her mind processing everything. They had come up against an enemy far stronger and faster than they had expected, but their team had emerged victorious. It was a win, but it didn't feel like one. Not yet. Varn stood beside her, his expression serious but relieved. His team had done well, and he had led them through their first real fight. He had proven himself in the heat of battle, not just as a fighter, but as a leader. But Lara knew it wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more dangers. This victory was only the beginning. The instructor's voice crackled over the comms, calling the team back to their ships. The mission wasn't complete yet. There were more enemy forces ahead, and they had to move quickly. Lara turned to Varn, her eyes meeting his. "This isn't over, Varn. We've got more ahead of us." Varn nodded, his face still focused. "I know. But we're ready." Lara didn't doubt him. He had come so far, and with every battle he was becoming more of the leader they needed. The once uncertain recruit had transformed into a reliable, capable warrior, and Lara couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. But she also knew that the next battle would be even harder. They made their way back to the ships, moving quickly but carefully. The enemy might be regrouping, and they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As they boarded their ship and the ramp closed behind them, Lara felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had been through countless battles, but everyone still took its toll. She glanced over at Varn, who was seated next to her, his hands clenched in his lap as he prepared for the next phase of the mission. "Take a breather, Varn," Lara said, her voice soft but firm. We've got time before we reach the next objective. Varn didn't respond immediately. He was still processing everything that had happened, his mind replaying the fight in his head. But after a moment, he leaned back in his seat, exhaling. Slowly, "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing," he said, his voice low. "We weren't prepared for how fast they were, how well they fought." Lara's gaze softened. She had been where he was, questioning, doubting, wondering if they had done enough. But the truth was, they had done their best. That was all they could do. "We learned," Lara said, her tone steady. "And we adapted. That's what counts. We're not perfect, but we keep moving forward." Varn nodded, taking in her words. He had always been so focused on strength, on winning. But now, he was starting to see that survival was about more than just fighting. It was about learning from every experience and using that knowledge to become better, faster, and smarter. As the ship flew through the void, heading toward their next mission, the reality of their situation started to settle in. There was no turning back now. They were in the middle of something far bigger than themselves, and if they were going to make it through, they had to rely on each other. Every soldier, every leader, every warrior. The journey to the next location was long and quiet. The team didn't speak much, each one lost in their own thoughts. They knew what was at stake, and they knew the enemy wasn't going to give them another chance. Finally, as the ship began its descent into enemy territory, the Instructor's voice came through the comms once again. "We've arrived. Prepare for deployment. The enemy is waiting for us." Lara's heart beat faster, but her mind remained clear. They had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to act. She turned to Varn, who was already standing, his eyes focused. He was ready. No more doubts. No more second-guessing. "We'll do this together," Lara said quietly, her eyes locking with his. Varn's expression hardened, his resolve stronger than it had been before. "Together," he repeated. The ship touched down with a soft jolt, and the doors opened. The team moved out quickly, spreading out into the war-torn landscape. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning metal, and the sounds of distant explosions echoed in the distance. The enemy was close. Lara took a deep breath, her body moving on autopilot as she slipped into the role she had played so many times before. But this time it felt different. This time they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something bigger. They were fighting for each other, for the future of the galaxy. Varn moved beside her, his movements quick and sure. He was no longer the uncertain recruit. He had become the leader he was meant to be. His team followed his lead, and with each step, Lara felt the strength of their unity. They were ready for whatever came next. The battle that followed was intense and brutal. The enemy came at them from all sides, their movements fast and deadly, but Lara and Varn led their team with precision. Every strategy, every plan they had learned was put to the test. There were moments of uncertainty, but together, they overcame every obstacle. Lara fought like she had fought before, calm, focused, and with purpose. Varn was right there beside her, leading his team with the same strength and clarity that Lara had shown him. It wasn't about strength anymore. It was about teamwork, about trusting each other, and about pushing through even when the odds seemed impossible. The final push came quickly. The enemy's forces were weakening, and the team pressed forward with renewed energy. When the last enemy fell, there was a brief moment of silence, a moment where it felt like the world had stopped. But then the reality set in. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. There was still more to come. The galaxy was still in chaos, and they had to keep fighting. But Lara knew one thing for sure. They had come this far because they had learned. They had grown, and they would keep going. Together.